Ladies and gentlemen, Binnall of America!
And now, ladies and gentlemen, your host, Tim Binnall.
No commercials, no subscriptions, no network, no rules. And at the end of the day, my friends, no comparison. Welcome to another edition of BOA The Revival. Really looking forward to tonight's show. We're kind of like venturing off onto a lake in a way, where I discovered Mark Sebastian Jordan's work through looking for stuff through Coast to Coast. And I found one of his articles on sort of a folkloric article from the knoxpages.com. And we'll get into all this as we get into it. And I'm like, wow, this is a really interesting sort of obscure history article. And I reached out to Mark and I'm like, I want to get you on All American. Because I'm like, he has a huge archive of stuff. And I'm reading through it and I'm like, holy shit, this is all good stuff. And I'm like, I got to get this guy on the show. So, but I will admit, folks, I almost feel like I bit off more than I can chew because the more I dug into Mark Sebastian Jordan's body of work, I'm like, this is I can't keep up. I can't keep up. He's been running for the Knox pages since August 2018. So it's like 17 pages of like very deep archive. I'm like, holy shit, I can't read all this stuff. And then I find out he's written a couple of books. And he's a writer, director, actor, storyteller, poet, playwright, historian, ghost hunter, music critic, and novelist. So he is a Renaissance man in a huge way. And so, honestly, I was like, oh, Jesus, how am I going to do this? Because he has so much to his name. So I was like, this is going to be exciting and a lot of fun talking to Mark. And we're only going to scratch the surface, folks. So with all that said, welcome to the program, Mark Sebastian Jordan. Thank you so much for coming on with All of America.
Thanks for having me. I'm excited to be here.
So we always start out with the bio, the background. You know, who is Mark Sebastian Jordan? Like I said, I found you just through by chance, like luck. Google put you in front of me from one of these articles from the Knox pages. Then I'm like, as I dug in, I'm like, wow, this guy's got a lot going on here. I love it. So who is Mark Sebastian Jordan? And give us a little bio background.
Well, if I could answer that question, and I probably wouldn't have done all these things trying to find the answer to it. I easily get bored. You can tell that because I move in 1,000 different directions, working on all kinds of things. The only thing that became clear to me by the time I was in my late teens, it became clear to me that I was a writer because that was the one thing I couldn't not do. You know, I couldn't fall asleep at night if I didn't actually, jot down whatever ideas were coming to me.
Yeah.
And so I just decided to run with that. And instead of heading off to New York or LA, I decided there were a lot of stories, a lot of things that needed to be looked into and written about in the Midwest. And I decided I would stay here and do that, which has led me to my current obscurity, because I've had people time and time again tell me, oh man, you should have gone to the big city. You'd be famous by now. Well, I felt a calling to do what I did here. And so here I am.
There you go. Well, so explain this to me somewhat. Knox Pages, that's who you write for. But Knox, and you talk about Knox County a lot. This is Knox County. This is, when I hear Knox, I think Knoxville, Tennessee, but it's not Knoxville, Tennessee. Is this a county in Ohio?
Yep. Knox County, pretty much dead center of Ohio. There's actually a town in Knox County called Centerburg, which is the geographical center of the state. So it's an area very rural. The county seat, Mount Vernon, is a town of only 10 or 12,000. And a number of years ago, I ended up in Mount Vernon working as a reporter at the newspaper that the town currently had called the Mount Vernon News. And I would say to any writer, if you ever get the chance to be a small town reporter, absolutely do it, and then absolutely don't do it for more than 3 years because it'll burn you out. But in that period of time, I got to know Knox County and the people of Knox County so well, and even then started delving into some of their stories, so that after I had moved on from that job a few years later, Knox Pages, which has kind of emerged since the collapse of the newspaper, Knox Pages contacted me and said, we're hoping to find someone who could write a history column, and you seem to have an interest in this area. And so I started writing it, and I'm going to be going into my 8th year of that here shortly, and I've never missed a deadline yet.
Wow. Yeah, no, dude, it's tremendous. I was blown away. Like I said, as I was going further and further back, I'm like, oh my God, I can't even.
Well, there are amazing stories out there. And if someone doesn't make the effort to capture them and retell them, they get lost. Stuff just dissolves away into the dust of history. And sometimes I feel like I'm one of the few people that's out there saving these stories before they're gone.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. The columns are all like, here's a weird story from like way back in the day from the area that like no one even would have known about if you hadn't dug it up. It's really remarkable.
Mm-hmm.
Now, one of the things I want to ask you about is you've written several books. One of the books involves being a background actor on the Shawshank Redemption, right?
That's right. That's my
amazing,
claim to
dude.
fame. I was an extra in the 1940s section of the film. Yeah, absolutely. And when we were making that film, I mean, the joke among us who were extras was, this is great. It'll come out. It'll flop. It'll be forgotten. We'll be able to buy copies of it for cheap in the cutout bin at Walmart next year. We never would have dreamed that it would become this. Well, the world's favorite movie. It's become an institution. We've done Shawshank reunions at the Ohio State Reformatory, and had just tens of thousands of people show up for these events. And I have led several times at these reunions, little groups of extras telling stories from behind the scenes. So I finally decided to take some of mine and put it in a book form. And called it Get Busy Living, behind the scenes on the set of Shawshank.
What was it like, dude? Was it awesome? Did you get to meet the Tim Robbins or Morgan Freeman?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. It was a mixture of absolute awesomeness and deadly dullness, because movie making is a whole lot of hurry up and wait.
Yeah.
And we were the low paid extras, so we did the most waiting. There would be times they'd have us out there for 10, 12, 14, 16 hours and then never even use us because the light was never right, and just send us home, and we'd try again the next day. But we did have the opportunities to meet the actors and chat with them. And it was so funny because Morgan Freeman, that guy he's so gregarious, chatty, loves telling jokes. He would be telling jokes, especially dirty jokes, right up until they hit the little clapper to start the scene, sometimes a couple seconds beyond. And then, boom, just like that, he'd be stone cold into character. Tim Robbins, on the other hand, total method actor. He had to be Andy Dufresne for the entire time that he was on set. So he was kind of sullen, quiet, off to himself. He didn't chat with us extras very often, but I did get to chat with him one time. But in a way, I feel like I can say, well, I had a conversation with Andy Dufresne. I've still not talked to Tim Robbins.
Wow, that's crazy. Have they? It's almost like, in a way, it could be like the Lebowski thing with how that became like a big thing. It would be cool if this became, because so they filmed this in a prison nearby where you live, right?
Yes, the Ohio State Reformatory. And I actually live in Mansfield now, so I'm just a couple miles away from it. And it was used for a lot of the interior scenes. And so it's been open as a tourist site for, almost ever since then. And people love to come see it. It's a famously creepy and haunted building. They've restored parts of it. Parts of it are still pretty much the way it was left. So it's an amazing place. And for the reunions, we've had people come from all over the world to these. We've had some of the actors come back. The thing is, at this point, I don't know if we'll do any more because some of the actors are getting way up there. I mean, they're some of them in their 80s now.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah. Well, it would be cool to keep it going. I would go out and check that out. That sounds really cool.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's amazing. Yeah, it's a great movie. It really is one of the best. When I see it on there, I'll watch it anytime.
Oh, yeah.
I'll flip through. It's like one of the anytime.
Yeah, if I see more than a minute of it, I'm going to be sucked into it.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. The next
so
thing
I can be seen in 3 places in the 1940s section of the film as one of the prisoners in background scenes. Of course, the thing is, I now have a beard and all this massive gray hair. Back then, my hair was short, dark, and I shaved the beard and mustache for the movie. Wasn't wearing my glasses. So no one recognizes me unless I clean it up.
Yeah.
But I was there. I got the stories.
Now, one of the other... we'll jump into one of your recent columns, and we'll circle back to some of the books. The fibbing child causes haircut lawsuit in 1915. So this is what I'm talking about, folks. I kind of stumbled upon these stories, and I'm like, holy shit, this Mark Sebastian Jordan guys, where are these stories coming from?
Well, so much of these I find because I do a lot of scanning of old newspapers. Often I will be looking in newspapers for a specific piece of information about one story, but I'll see something in passing along the way, and find another one of these stories, and it'll be like, wow, that's great. That's just too good to pass up. And this was one of those, as I recall, that I was working on something else and just bumped into this story along the way, and I thought it was hilarious, so I wrote it.
And what is the story here? It's a kid said something happened with a haircut, and then it caused a lawsuit. Right? Can you recount the story a little bit?
Not really, because I wrote this one a few months back, and it was a real fast one sort of article.
Right.
So I may recall the ones that are more in depth, but a short one like that, all I recall is that the kid said something and a lawsuit was filed, and so what was a very small situation suddenly exploded into a big one.
Isn't that always the way?
Mm-hmm.
All right, well, let's talk about the book then. Seeley Rose Murders at Malabar Farm.
Yes.
Tell me about this. So this is a pretty big case?
It was national news back in 1896. And the legend of Seeley Rose has spread so far and wide. Sometimes I even do a Google search, and I'll find that some version of the story is showing up on like a Czech website or some language like that. So it is really spread. It's a fascinating story because it is the true story of a disturbed young woman who poisoned her entire family. Now, I have to say that kind of story in itself is not that rare, sadly.
Yeah, it's true.
But this one has some very unusual features to it because the young woman today she would be diagnosed as developmentally disabled. They had some different and ugly words for it back in 1896.
Okay,
1896, yeah.
All right.
And so she did this because she thought that her family was interfering with her attempts to get together with her crush, who was the boy who lived next door, a fellow by the name of Guy Barry. Seeley, at the time this happened when she had just turned 23 years old, but she's developmentally disabled. She had only stopped going to school a couple years before this happened, and she only stopped going to school because the teachers came to her parents' house and said, hey, she's 20 years old. She's not going to learn anything more. At the time she quit going to school, one of her teachers estimated that she had the mental level of about a first grader.
Oh, boy.
So developmentally disabled, but just sharp enough to be dangerous, because she felt like they were interfering with her. And, just like, imagine if you held out a piece of candy to a little kid, and then someone steps in the way as the kid's coming to get the candy. What are they going to do? They're going to push them out of the way, or, go around them somehow to get to that piece of candy. Well, Celie was like that, and no one recognized how dangerous she could be because she seemed so simple-minded. Even the kids of the place where she lived had nicknamed her Silly Rose. They didn't think she was dangerous, and they were very wrong about that, because she was smart enough to understand that rat poison was very dangerous. Her parents had always told her to never touch that stuff, that, just a pinch of that could kill a person. Well, she took that bit of information, and then she heard her parents discussing an article in the newspaper where a young man had supposedly killed some people so he could run away with their daughter. And that gave her the idea of this kind of a crime of passion.
Oh, boy.
And she was able to put those pieces of information together. And then she took some Rough on Rats brand rat poison, which is mostly arsenic, mixed it in with the cottage cheese that she served the family for breakfast one morning. That killed her father and brother. Her mother had only eaten a little bit of it. So after she started recovering, Celie poisoned her a second time.
Oh, boy.
She additionally tried to poison the parents of the boy that she had the crush on, and who, incidentally, I don't think had any actual interest in her. She also tried to poison the pastor from their church. So when you put all this information together, this is murder or attempted murder on multiple occasions. So Celie Rose is, to my knowledge, the only case I've ever heard of a developmentally disabled person who was also a psychopathic serial killer.
Wow.
It's extraordinary.
That's quite the story.
Yeah, so I dug into that. It got a lot of attention when it happened in 1896. Then it got another boost. The tie-in with Malabar Farm. Malabar Farm is a state park in central Ohio. That was the estate of the Pulitzer Prize winning writer Louis Bromfield, who was very big in the 1930s and 40s. He created this big showcase farm where he wanted to demonstrate agricultural techniques and everything like that. And in writing about the place where he created this farm, it was in a place called Pleasant Valley. So he wrote a book called Pleasant Valley, which talks about his memories of growing up in rural Ohio. It talks about the history of the valley, and it talks about the farm he was trying to create. And he includes a version of the Celie Rose story. And this book was famous throughout the U.S., and it was published in many other languages. So that took Celie's story worldwide. So I was actually just reviving it when I dug into it. But the thing I did, which Bromfield did not do, he just based his account on the kind of secondhand stories that he got from some of the neighbors, and it's a little inaccurate. So I decided to dig into the original newspaper accounts, original documents and such. I got into the probate court files in Mansfield, Ohio, and opened up Celie's mother's will for the first time since it had been filed in there. I mean, what a feeling to actually get hands-on with some of the documentation on a case like this.
Wow. All right. So what became of Celie Rose after she poisoned all these people?
She was found not guilty by reason of insanity and sent to she was initially sent to the Toledo State Hospital and eventually was transferred to the Lima State Hospital. Spent the rest of her days there. And died in 1934, just a day past her 61st birthday. Now, there are a whole bunch of strange twists and turns with the story along the way, but we won't get into that now. The book is out there. It's available from the History Press, and I'm excited that we just released an audiobook version of it on Tangible Media just last week. So, if anyone wants to hear me read the book, because I insisted on doing it myself. So I'm not going to have anyone else do this. This is mine, baby. So it's out there in all the places you can get audio.
There you go. Yeah, the Celie Rose Murders at Malamar Malabar Farm.
Yeah.
There you go. And the Shawshank book is also out there, right? What's the name of that again?
Get Busy Living.
Yes.
Yeah, Get Busy Living. What's the rest of it? Behind the scenes on the world's favorite movie. So
there you go. Now
that's available. Plus, I have another one from the History Press called "The Witch of Mansfield," which is the story of Phoebe Wise, an eccentric woman who lived in Mansfield in the late 1800s, and who's also very tied in with the story of Louis Bromfield. She was an eccentric woman. She could be seen spotted on the streets of Mansfield, stalking down the street wearing an old pre-Civil War era ball gown, the train of the dress trailing in the dust behind her, making a little dust cloud, big old wide-brimmed hat decorated with whatever flowers were in season. If it was wintertime, she'd have wheat or rye stuck into the brim. So an extraordinary figure walking down the street. If anyone so much as gave her a funny look, she'd cuss him out on the spot. She was a fascinating character. She ended up defending herself from a stalker, which is the main plot of the book. So that's a fascinating one too. And then I've got another one coming out this fall called The Maplehurst Murder, which is a murder case from 1905 that took place in Mount Vernon.
Interesting. So one of the things I have that's in the notes here, it's The Witch of Mansfield, the Tetched life of Phoebe Wise. Tetched. Yeah, talk about that word, tetched, because that's the first I'd seen it before.
Yeah, it's one you don't see very often anymore. It's a dialect word. It's a version of the word touched, but it, I think, originally comes from rural England, and it persisted in some rural areas in the U.S. for a while. But tetched means touched by the hand of God. It's someone who's a little mentally different, a little out there, but they've got insights that may be of some value. Phoebe Wise definitely referred to herself as being tetched. She understood that she was an outsider, that she was a little more in contact with nature as opposed to being organized around city life. Even though she lived right on the edge of the city, she was more connected with nature. She's the kind of person that would, walk through her farmyard, and animals, domesticated and wild, would follow after her.
Interesting. Yeah.
That's why some people thought she was a witch. And, in the sense of someone being in touch with nature in an almost supernatural sort of way, I think she was. Yeah.
Well, tetched. I'm going to have to look more into that. I might start to describe myself as tetched.
Yeah.
It's a little,
I know I am.
Yeah. It's a cool moniker. So you've written all these pieces for Knox Pages. Is there any particular ones that stand out to you that are like your favorites, or because I don't want to throw one at you from deep in the archive. So is there any that stand out that you really enjoyed putting together, where you're like, this is one of my favorite things that stories.
One of them that I thought was one of the best ones I've ever did is called The Shy Death of it's The Lonesome Death of Shy Eddie Berger. And he was a school child in Knox County in 1876, if I remember correctly. And the basic news report that I initially found was fairly straightforward, but a little odd, but mainly straightforward. News report that said this young man got lost in a snowstorm and perished in the snowstorm, and they didn't find his body until weeks later, when the winter snow had started to melt some. And that's an unfortunate story, a sad story, but it kind of nagged at my thoughts. It's like, how did this young fellow get lost in the snowstorm? Because he was, I think, something like 11 years old or so not a tiny child. And the article had said he was just on his way to school. Well, what I finally had to do to really feel like I grasped the story, and this is something I do with a lot of the things I write, it's like, I can't really know this story until I stand in the place where these people stood. I see the horizon that they saw. then I can begin to put this story together. So I took all of the accounts from every little scrap of newspaper coverage I could find about this case, about Eddie Berger, and I went to those places and I reconstructed the path this child took from his home on his way to school. And it happened to be a heavy snowstorm that day. But this child had only been in the county. His family had only moved there a few months previous. So he's not extremely familiar with stuff. And it just so happened that he was extremely shy. So he felt very inhibited about going up to a stranger's house and asking for help. And they couldn't understand why he never got to the school. He veered off and started going east. Well, once I actually went to the places where he was known to have been seen, I was finally able to understand what he did. Through the snow, it distorted his view of things. And so he thought he was one place when he actually wasn't. So when he realized that the snow was so bad he wouldn't be able to get to the school, he was trying to turn back around and find the road that would lead back to his family's house. But the place he saw in the distance that he thought was a little town was actually a different town, and that caused him to overcorrect to the east. And so I'm sure this child is getting bewildered that he thinks he's doing the logical thing, and he just keeps getting more and more lost, stranger places, people he doesn't know, and he's too afraid to walk up to someone's house and ask for help. And that's how he ends up freezing to death in the corner of a field. And so to me, it was fascinating, and the story didn't make sense until I got on the ground and walked where this kid walked.
Jeez. Wow. Yeah. That's powerful.
Mm-hmm.
My goodness. So what sort of motivates you to find these stories? Like, what do you look for? You know, I'm sure you're looking for news stories right now. So like, what kind of things do you look for when you're looking for stories?
If it's something that just catches my interest as a little bit of a, human interest in some way, that could potentially be something. There's some of those where I find something, and then once I do a little research, it expands into something even bigger. Sometimes these stories just explode in all directions. There's times when I think I'm going to find a quick little story and write about it. If I can find a photograph of someone involved in the story or a place involved in the story, that definitely helps. But when I dig into it, sometimes the story explodes in all directions, and it ends up being a project that takes a few weeks to research. But it's, I do have some things in the back of my mind that are ideas I want to go back to. But it's probably frightening just how much I rely on dumb luck and stumbling into stories to find these and somehow make it work.
Yeah. Well, what do you use for research? Like newspapers.com, and how do you even research this stuff nowadays?
Newspapers.com has some good stuff. They don't have everything. So one thing that has been of great use to me is there is a college in Knox County called Kenyon College. It's pretty well known. It's a small university, but it is well known. And as part of their effort to connect people with local history, they've put some material, photographs and newspapers and things online that are not available through newspapers.com. And sometimes if the particular newspaper I need for a certain date isn't available online, then I find myself in the library in Mount Vernon spooling through reels and reels of microfiche trying to find the information I need.
There you go. Yeah. Now I'm going to throw. I'll try some other ones here, maybe that I picked up, and see if any of these ring a bell here, because this one's really weird. Mount Vernon man was charged with operating Chuck Luck in a Hieronymus outfit. What is that even? What does that even mean?
Right. That was the first question, and that was the case of a guy who was doing a little gambling outfit in a local bar. Chuck Luck was apparently a kind of gambling card game that was popular in the 1800s that, as far as I know, has completely died out because I hadn't heard of it. I had to look it up and figure out what the heck it was. And I'm still not entirely sure what the newspaper meant by calling it a Hieronymus outfit, because Hieronymus is one of those words referring to an old fancy priest getup and such. So I don't know if the guy was like dressing up in a costume and presiding over this game.
So that was like the headline in the newspaper.
Yep.
Weird.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Sometimes it's frustrating because you can dig into a story and not be able to find every answer.
Here's a weird one. Do you ever hear from, I always find it fascinating when people write about like these older stories. Do you ever hear from people who were like related to the people who were in the story?
Sometimes I do. As a matter of fact, speaking of the story of Eddie Berger, I ended up hearing from what was it was like a great grandnephew or something like that of him, who's alive and living in Colorado. And they had carried down the story in the family over the years. And he had actually been inspired to write a poem about it. So in a follow-up article, with his permission, I actually published his poem because that is so great to reconnect with the actual family and share that. So I love when that happens. And sometimes people will come up with new information that I didn't have that takes the story even deeper.
Yeah. You have a lot of grave robbing stories that come up.
Yeah.
Just like why? Why do you think that is?
Well, I found one, and then that led to another. But it's one of those things that is interesting. It's fascinating when something that strange and anomalous pops up. A lot of times people don't realize that in a place like Ohio in the mid to late 1800s, a lot of that went on because there were medical schools. And the people that were being trained to be doctors had to have something to work on. And, in those days, they didn't have fancy computer simulations or something like that. They had to have actual corpses. But yet there was no supply given unless people, donated their bodies to science, which wasn't done that much. So what happened is you would have people called resurrectionists who would go out and dig up bodies and then sell them to the medical colleges. Most of the time, they stuck more to the cities, closer to the actual medical schools, but they did, in fact, at times come out into the rural areas and go hunting as well. And so I found some articles about that. But the fun part with one of those was I found an article that alleged about an incident taking place in a small town in Knox County. But once I really dug into it and dug through all the relevant information, it ended up appearing that was in fact a hoax. So sometimes I debunk stories.
There you go. You exonerated someone's great grandfather for grave robbing.
Yeah,
he can rest in peace now. Now, these are all sort of like old-timey, crimey, I don't know how you describe them, almost folkloric, but they're not real true stories that happened back in the day.
Yeah.
Do you encounter any sort of paranormal stuff like UFOs or Bigfoot or anything, ghosts?
I encounter some ghost things. I wrote one fun article that it's fun in some ways, not fun in other ways. But I wrote an article about the hauntings at Kenyon College because I knew a guy who used to work in the security detail at the college, and he encountered so many things along the way. They eventually let him start giving ghost tours about some of the haunted sites at the college. He has passed on now. So I ended up writing a column just kind of sharing some of his stories as I knew them, plus including some of my own encounters, because I had taken his ghost tour a couple of times, and at one point where some friends and I had gotten together and asked him to give us the ghost tour. And we're sitting there in the chapel, the church at Kenyon College, and he had stepped up into the pulpit to tell us some of the ghost stories associated with that building, while our little group, which was like 4 or 5 people, sat in the pews listening to him. And then at one point, while he's telling stories about ghostly sightings in that very building, the lights started to dim out on us.
Oh, wow.
Went completely dark. And Turner, who was the guy giving the tour, almost fell out of the pulpit trying to get out of it and go investigate what had happened. And, well, there's the lights in the chapel were controlled by a rheostat over on the side. So as they started to go out, he was able to point at the rheostat, and we turned and looked and saw it turn down and turn off. So that was a pretty amazing experience to have happened to us right there. And I don't see any way that that Turner could have faked it, because he was quite startled by it himself.
Yeah, that's pretty wild. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. And then there's also, if anyone wants to check out a creepy place, go to the dance studio at Kenyon College, which is built over an old swimming pool. It used to be where the swimming pool of the college was in years gone past, back in the 1940s. There are lots of various ghost stories, and Turner himself had some encounters in that building. But without seeing anything myself, I nonetheless, the first time I took his tour, I started getting an incredibly uneasy feeling in the pit of my stomach that was so bad. Near the end of his stories in that part of the tour, I was actually thinking about pushing past people and walking out, because it was so bad. But then we ended and we all went outside. And once I was outside, I felt fine again. And so I just thought, okay, that was kind of weird. But then the subsequent times I took the tour with him, exact same feeling in that place. So that was weird. A place that I instantly recognized there's something seriously off about this place.
Yeah, that's chilling.
Mm-hmm.
Wow. All right. Now, does the name Gladys Crawford ring a bell? Criminal mastermind Gladys Crawford? Lady mixed up in a bank robbery or something like that? Yeah,
that is the woman that I think, and boy, there might be a whole book in her at some point. There was a bank robbery in Fredericktown in the 1930s, if I recall correctly, that was very, very dramatic. These people hit the bank and they actually abducted the teller, took him to the edge of town, and then mercifully they just threw him out of the car and didn't kill him or hurt him or anything. But once they eventually followed the leads and tracked down the money in that case, this woman was one of the people who had some of the proceeds from that bank robbery. And it seems like there's not a whole lot of information in the 1930s. It's like there were lots of lines of information where she was involved in these various projects, but no one at that time tied all those lines together. But I did when I was doing my research, and I actually think she was a mastermind who was planning a lot of the heists that took place from Chicago, all the way through Ohio, through that part of the Midwest, same kind of territory that Dillinger was covering in those years. This was a smaller operation, but I think she was the mastermind behind it. But I don't think anyone really quite realized that she was, because as far as I can tell from the surviving information, she had a way of manipulating guys, and getting them to fall in love with her, and then she would direct them to do this kind of stuff. And it happened over and over and over again. So I think, here's this female criminal mastermind that no one ever really recognized what she was.
Hey, that's the way to do it, right?
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Yeah,
fascinating.
Well, there was a line in one of your pieces. Now, I'm not going to necessarily ask you about the clever con pulled off by old Nath Headington. But you say past rascals with outside. You're a fan of past rascals with outsized personalities, which I thought was a great way of putting it. So let's talk about some of these. And if old Nath is one that rings a bell, then definitely talk about that. But these past rascals with outside. That should be the title of a book if you write one of them.
That
past
might be
rascals with outsized personalities.
That might be a good title. If well, you know how I got started with the History Press is they read some of my History Knox columns, and they approached me and said, "Do you want to put some of your columns together for a book?" And I said, "Well, yeah, I do, but I got a few other things I want to write about first." And then I told them about Celie Rose and Phoebe Wise. So basically, as it runs, I've got like 5 books waiting in the wings, and at some point, we'll also do a collection of the smaller columns with characters like this guy. This guy in particular was a fellow who had a scam that he developed where he announced that he was going to be leaving town and that he wanted to sell, I think it was his cow that he wanted to sell, or was it a horse? I haven't I'm not sure. I don't looked at that story in a while, but he wanted to do this. And so when people would come and talk to him about the idea of buying it, he would finally come to a verbal agreement with them, and they'd pay him the money. And, you know, he said that he would bring the animal to them as he was leaving town the following day. Well, he kept this going the whole day long, and he ended up selling that animal to like 8 or 10 different people along the way, and, made all kinds of money, and took off the following day and didn't leave the animal for anyone, took it with him.
Oh, man.
And back in those days, it wasn't so easy to track someone down. Once someone left town, you ain't going to find them. So it was a scam.
Yeah, for sure. You can get away with all kinds of stuff back then. I was thinking about that recently with like serial killers and stuff like that.
Oh, yeah.
People, do you have anything crazy like that? Any serial killer type stuff or bizarre murders?
Well, I did do a series about Cletus Reese, who was a disturbed, well, he had been released from a mental hospital. He lived right around the border of Knox County and Coshocton County, the next county over. And this was in the 1950s. He had lived by himself on the family farm and had gotten unstable and disturbed. And so his family committed him to the state mental hospital for a while. And after he was there for a period of time, the doctors approached his sister and said, "We think he might benefit from a program of supervised release. If you can supervise him, then we'd be willing to send him back home." And the sister was very, very uncertain about that, very unsettled by the idea, because she lived in a different town. You know, she could drive over and check on him every day or two, but she couldn't be there to supervise him as such. But they put pressure on her to go ahead and do this. So she finally agreed, and they sent him back to the farm. And apparently what he started doing once he was isolated on the farm, he would go roaming the hills at night. Sometimes, you know, if someone happened to be driving along at 3 a.m., they might see Cletus suddenly pop out of the trees with his team of bloodhounds, just apparently randomly combing the hills. A couple people disappeared along the way, and the local law enforcement started looking into this. And one of them who had disappeared was a used car salesman. You know, back in those days, if you were interested in a car, a salesman might actually bring it to your house for you to test drive. Well, this had been done. Cletus had called and asked about a car, and car salesman brought a car out and he did a test drive. And then the following day, the car lot is wondering where their car is, and the salesman didn't come in that morning. And the sister goes to the house and finds that this car is sitting there at the old farm, and her brother denies knowing anything about it. Just, the guy left, but he seemed strange the way he talked about it. And so the law was finally called, and they came out and looked, and they interrogated Cletus, and he finally told them to go look out in the field behind the barn, and that's where they would find the body. He had just taken a baseball bat and beaten the guy to death.
Jesus, Cletus.
And then he confessed where 2 more bodies would be found in different areas on the farm. And sure enough, they found them there. And interestingly, the county sheriff, after they found the 3rd body, said, okay, we found everything. We're done. Let's put him on trial for this. He did not want to look anymore. So to this day, there are a lot of people who have said, how many more bodies might be out there? Was Cletus doing? He always seemed to come up with old cars that he would tear apart and then sell the parts. So, was he maybe like harvesting travelers' cars, as they came through that area? We don't know. I ended up doing a series of articles about him, and I did some local talks about him. And the people who own the property now came to one of those talks. So they talked to me, and I talked to the one guy, and he said, I don't really think that Cletus killed anyone other than those 3 people. But he said, let me tell you, every time we do any digging on the farm, I keep my eyes open.
It would be interesting I wonder if there's any like paranormal activity at the guy's house there with all those people having been killed right around the area. That'd be interesting.
Well, I talked to the property owner's son, lives in the house where Cletus lived at this point. And he said he thought he had something weird happening once because he was hearing noises at night and finding the kitchen cupboards open, but then he found it was a squirrel that had broken into the house. So
there you go.
He said beyond that, he hasn't encountered anything.
Oh man. Have you ever come across any weird UFO stories in your travels?
Not really. That's
like
there's
alien,
only
like someone encountered an alien or something.
There is one story that popped up, and it's not really too horribly long ago. It was maybe only 10 or 15 years ago, where someone reported seeing what they interpreted as an alien near Fredericktown in Knox County. Unfortunately, I've not found a person to talk about that I could do a column on it. Maybe someone, I can actually find someone involved with that story at some point. Whoever originally spotted that and reported it has kept a very low profile since then, because it did get a lot of attention and was kind of sensationalized through some of the UFO groups online and such. I'm sure you would be able to find, if you searched about it, alien sighting Fredericktown, Ohio. But the thing that interested me specifically was that where that was noted as happening, at least from my understanding of the story, is very close to a spot where a different kind of ghost sighting has been reported many times over the years. It's actually one of the stories that I had to dig into to find what the historical roots of the story was, because the story of a woman, a ghostly young woman, walking along the road, and people stop and give her a ride, and then she disappears from their car, or she gets out of their car. Then, once they've taken her to where she needs to go, and then the next thing they look and she's disappeared. That has been reported several times over the years. And this ghost is, just has become known and sort of referred to as Susie's ghost. And so I dug in and found the historical roots of this. And there actually is a historical root that goes back to the 1860s, where a young woman was walking down that road after church to get home, but it was an extraordinarily cold day, and she ended up collapsing in the ditch and succumbing to the cold and dying. And in that spot, ever since then, has had this story pop up. Well, it's really interesting that this alien paranormal story pops up in almost the exactly same place.
Weird.
Yeah.
That's interesting.
Sometimes I wonder if, it can be just that there's a certain energy that becomes charged in a certain place that can then make strange things happen there.
Yeah, that's really weird.
I wish I had some Bigfoot stories from Knox County. I don't yet. I may yet get something from someone. I know others from other places. I'm friends with. There's a woman who lives near Loudonville, Ohio, that I know that there's actually been a documentary done about the Bigfoot encounter she had on her farm. And I have a friend who lives down in Gallipolis, Ohio, down by the Ohio River, who has told me about the time that he encountered Bigfoot when he was a teenager, and he actually took me to the site where he saw this. And later, just as a fun thing, I made a painting of this little pond where he had the sighting with the Bigfoot in it and gave it to him as a present. So he appreciated that.
Now, I might be making a trip down to that area later this year by Serpent Mound. How close is that to you, Serpent Mound?
It's a little ways down there, but I've driven down there a number of times to
Is it
visit
worth the trip?
It is. It is. The Serpent Mound is an uncanny place. I have twice. I've probably been there 5 or 6 times. On at least 2 occasions that I've been there, I've had the same odd thing happen. I would be there with someone else, and we would split up and go on opposite sides of the mound as we're walking up and down it. And 2 different times I have done that, and turn back to find or see my, friend on the other side of the mound, and they were gone. And so I start looking around and say, where could they have gone? And then I look where I just looked a moment ago, and they were back again.
Weird.
So, and I've had that happen twice.
Weird. I'm going to look for that to happen then when I go.
It's very interesting. Plus, it interests me that the Serpent Mound is within 5 miles or so of where Celie Rose was born.
Oh, really?
Yeah. So she has connections to that whole area as well.
All right. Well, I'll let you know when I check it out.
Maybe I could come down there and join you and meet you in person.
I'll let you know. Yeah, for sure.
Yeah.
I'll let you know. It's going to be like the early September.
Okay, we'll see. It's a very busy time for me as well around then.
I'm sure.
But yeah,
I'm sure.
That would be cool to do.
Well, it's interesting in a way, not to get too meta in a sense, but like you get all these stories from the old newspapers. It's very interesting. You mentioned the alien story from like 10 or 15 years ago. I imagine it may have been in a local paper or whatever. But nowadays, I guess the point I'm trying to make is nowadays it's like there's more information than ever, but it's not quite like it was in the olden days where you could look in the old newspapers. Now it's like everything's so distributed. And you were saying earlier, the newspaper, and she like died. So it's a completely different way of trying to find and collect stories as you move along in time, if you will.
Yeah. Plus there's a real tendency for, they just skim a story today, just give the basics and then move on to something else. Everyone's so used to surfing onto other things. But what I like to do is I like to kind of claim the moment and say, okay, we're going to stop here and we're going to do a deep dive into this story, because that's where you really find the interesting things and figure out, what makes people tick. That's ultimately what is so interesting for me. I mean, one of the things I say when I give talks to groups is if you look at the big picture, I am going to go kind of meta here anyway.
Yeah.
But things like science tell us what we are. Things like philosophy and religion tell us why we are. But it is stories that tell us who we are. That's why it's so important to save these things. And that's why I've dedicated my life to going to that little dusky border between fact and folklore and pulling as much as I can back from the edge.
There you go. Man, that's profound for sure. Yeah. Absolutely. Yeah. I'm a little, you've left me almost speechless here, but
but it ends up being so fascinating along the way, because there's some amazing stories out there and weird stuff too. I've been involved with ghost hunting groups before. And I've encountered a lot of ghostly stuff. I mentioned the Ohio State Reformatory. You want to go to a haunted place sometime, that's the place to go. I worked there for a while as a tour guide for a year or two.
Really?
And and it's not uncommon to have odd things happen in there. One of the most memorable things for me was one that happened on a tour early on when I was still learning about the place. There was one tour where I served as the pusher at the back of the tour group. Someone else was leading the tour, and I was just herding people, moving them along.
Gotcha.
In the back.
Okay. Yeah.
We went down into the basement beneath Solitary to the place where there used to be a thing called the Hole. It was like the ultimate solitary confinement, where the prisoners would, climb down into a hole and be shut in there for an extended period. Well, I had, got the people into the room, was standing in the doorway, and then a guy cleared his throat behind me because I was blocking the door, and I stepped aside to let him in and realized there wasn't anyone else there.
Oh,
and
wow.
I had distinctly heard this guy clear his throat, and he was taller than me. So it's like he was standing right behind me.
Yeah.
And kind of, down toward me. And later on, when I told some of the other tour guides about getting this, having this happen, they said, "Oh yeah, that's one of the guards from years ago. We all know him as the tall guy." Others had encountered this very one, and I didn't know the story at that point, but then I encountered him too. God, I could keep telling stories from that place for a while.
Sounds remarkable. Yeah. Well, when you're in a situation like that, when you're sort of like there all the time, things become, the paranormal just becomes normal because it's part of your everyday life. Yeah. It's I've always wanted to kind of do that, immerse myself in a haunted location as a tour guide or something like that, because it
is interesting. It's definitely there.
So you got what else do you have beyond the books here? We got the Sealy Rose Murders at Malabar Farm, The Witch of Mansfield, The Tetched. Love that. I'm telling you, man, I'm gonna start calling myself the Tetched Tim Binnall. The Tetched Life of Phoebe Wise, and also the Shawshank book. What else you got going on? What do you have out there? Well,
this fall in September, I have a new book coming out from the History Press, which is going to be probably, we're still refining everything, but it's probably going to be titled The Maplehurst Murder. It's about a case which took place in Mount Vernon, Ohio in 1905, where a woman who worked at this mansion, the Maplehurst Mansion, she worked there and lived on site. And one night when she was coming home, she was attacked, assaulted, and murdered. Jesus. And the case remains officially unsolved to this day, but I'm actually going to be naming a suspect in the book.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. I mean, after all this time, nothing can be proven conclusively, but that's kind of every true crime writer's dream, to have a case where you can actually say, I think this person did it. Yeah.
Yeah. Nice.
Yeah.
When's that coming
I'll be
out?
making the rounds, doing talks about that and other podcasts and such. That'll be out around September 15th.
All right, we'll get you back on to talk about that when it comes out. Now, this is I'm going to throw you a curveball here in a sense, but it's like, do you all these stories, dude, are like murder and mayhem. Do you have any stories that are that you kind of can that are a little more uplifting, where you're like, okay, that's a good story. That kind of is a testament to the goodness of humankind beyond any of these murders and mayhem.
Right. Well, I try to keep an eye out for more positive stories or fun stories, or sometimes just, memories of a place that used to be in Knox County that isn't there now. People enjoy the stories like that, and then they can comment on them and share their stories. So I'm always looking for things like that too, to mix it up so that it's not all doom and gloom. But I do understand that part of writing a column like this, and it is known, the compelling stories that get a lot of hits are the ones where I'm looking at some of this dark stuff, and the way I've kind of grown to explain this to people is, I'm kind of like a historian version of Stephen King. I write about a lot of dark stuff, but by writing about the dark stuff and dealing with it, then I can leave it there in the research I've done, the things I've written, and it leaves me very light and free afterwards. It's kind of a cathartic thing to write about stuff like this. So, the people who know me, spend time with me, tend to describe me as a friendly, relaxed, and charming person who likes a lot.
You're just writing about murder all the time. It's all good.
Yeah. Well, it's one of those things. Those are the stories that have always fascinated people. One of the things that I kind of a recurring theme that I love to bring up and make jokes about is, I'll say something about the good old days in my column and then proceed to deliver some story that's about something completely weird and whacked out. Because the fact is, people are just as strange and crazy. They always have been. It's nothing new. People are weird, and they will continue to be weird, and they have weird misadventures. And I love writing about things like that, both dark and light, because it just connects us, like I said, with who we are, who we've been. Yeah.
Well, I've often said that when I write for Coast to Coast, so I kind of cover similar type things, contemporaneous times. And it's like, what I love is the stories that are like, this only happened once ever.
Yeah.
Like I had a story about like some people that were playing Monopoly on the side of on a sidewalk in front of an apartment, and some guy came at 6 a.m. and a guy came down with a samurai sword, and it was like, this is never going to happen ever. It's the only time in human history this story ever happened. Like, it's an amazing confluence of events. So the people are weird, man. People are I delve into a lot of UFOs and Bigfoot stuff, but really at the end of the day, it's like the people stories are usually the ones where I'm like, that's just fucking weird, man.
Right.
That's just weird. Like, what were you thinking?
Exactly.
Before I let you go, clown stories. You got anything with a clown?
I don't think I've ever encountered any clown stories. That's something I'll have to be on the lookout for. Yeah.
Always be on the lookout for clowns.
Okay.
So that's a life axiom. Well, Mark Sebastian Jordan, where do you want me to send people? On Facebook, they can find your stuff there. And Knox Pages is where you're calling.
Yeah, you can see my weekly column on Knox Pages. You can find my books and audiobooks, wherever you get those things like that. And I'm on Facebook. I have a writer page there, or just my regular social media. You can look me up. I'm there.
And do you have anything you want to plug, like events and stuff? You do a lot of stuff, right? You're like out there speaking and doing things.
Right.
As I said, you're super prolific.
Well, the latest thing is the audiobook version of Celie Rowe's story, which just came out from Tantor Media. So I definitely want to plug that. And then probably the next personal appearance I will be doing is in August. I'm going to be doing a living history portrayal of the composer Johannes Brahms. So I'm growing out my beard and hair so I can look all bushy and such for that. And then after I do that, I'm going to shave part of the beard, but keep the other part, because every 2 years they do a living history event in Mount Vernon at Mound View Cemetery, where we have people actually enact the lives of some of the people buried there. And for the last couple of years, they've all been based on my columns. So
Wow.
I will actually be portraying a newspaper editor from back in the mid 1800s in Mount Vernon. So I will be involved in that directly this time.
Wow. And this is
Yeah.
like an event where you're going to portray the
Yeah,
news.
we
And it's at
bring
the
around-
graveyard?
We bring around people in
That
groups
sounds awesome.
to each grave. And what's really cool with this one is I'm going to portray the one newspaper editor. A friend of mine is going to portray the rival editor, and they happen to be buried pretty close to each other. So
What?
we're going to yell at each other and heckle during each other's spiels.
Oh, wow.
It's great. Yeah, we just have the group of people, and then they roam from grave to grave. Where
It's like
there's
around
someone there
Halloween
that
it's
tells a
happening?
story. We actually do it in September while the weather's
Okay.
still warm. So
Very good.
It's a
All right.
fantastic event.
That sounds awesome. All right. As I said, folks, he wears many hats. He's amazing. Mark Sebastian Jordan, thank you so much for coming on the show. I've had an absolute blast chatting with you. You do yeoman's work finding these old stories. You inspire
Somebody's
me to want
gotta
to get
do
out
it.
there and look into my area for these kind of tales.
Yeah.
So
Excellent.
thank you so much for what you do. And thanks
You're
for coming on
welcome.
the show, brother.
Thanks for having me.